83. We got some interesting stuff today. We'll talk a little bit about why is the intake valve bigger than the exhaust valve. Weschler, Edelin, Matt, Charlie. Hey, Charlie, I saw you at the race. Nat, Sandro, Daryl. I saw a bunch of you guys at the race, but you know what? It wasn't but so many hours that we could go over there and talk to everybody. So I tried to smile and wave. Bruno, what's up? There's my transporter, Scott, Alex, Sam, Cody. Tech Talk Tuesday. And amazingly enough, my AARP calculator is in Tennessee. Here I am in Georgia. So I got this little mini one. I don't have my cross, so I drew it on here. And this is 83 weeks in a row, y'all. 83 weeks in a row. That's an amazing number for me. So I'm going to prop this up and reverse it over and talk to y'all in person for a minute. I want to tell you about this cool shirt I found when I was packing up. I got a lot of boxes yet to pack up, so I'm going to interrupt you for a minute. I want to show you all this. This shirt right here, 1990, when John Myers was the world's quickest pro stocker. This was his first full year on the scene. We ran 89. I think we ran most of the races in 89, but we didn't do near as good as we did in 1990. So how many years ago was that? Hey, Ronnie. Hey, Charlie. Jesse. Number 83. That's right. How many years ago was that, y'all? 1990. 2021 minus 1990. 31 years ago, y'all. This t-shirt, I opened it up. It was new in the wrapper today, so I have soiled it. But it is, look at this, man. Look at that color on that shirt, man. Isn't that neat? Anyway, that's the late, great John Myers. He broke the record about 6 times that year. Yeah, man, 31 years. How about that? That's hard to believe we even had a pro stock bike that looked this good 31 years ago, or was the fastest one and the quickest one in the country at the time. And we were running against some stiff competition too. Anyway, I wanted to show off the shirt. I wanted to tell you I'm in Georgia. I'm going to finish loading up some more stuff tomorrow. I only have my pickup and a little trailer. I got Buck. Hey, Rick. I got Buck. My 2003 Road King is in my trailer, and I'm going to take him to Tennessee and try and do my best to tinker around with it and finish it. Found a lot of good folks up near me in Nashville that will loan me or charge me or rent me a dyno for me to tune Buck. I'm out of the dyno tuning business, but I will definitely be cool to entertain whatever those guys know versus what I know and see if we can learn some stuff doing it together. Thank you, John. Hey, Kerrigan. Willie, Peoples, and Tyson. Hey, I'm going to flip the camera over now so you don't have to look at this, and we'll look at more of this stuff over here. So be patient. I'm flipping the camera, not you. I'm going to get this thing long enough right here where I can get it on the floor. Hopefully. And get a better view here. Here we go. All right, today... That might be all right. Scott. Okay, what socks? What socks? Okay, here they are. Penguin socks today. Jackie asked me, she said, "What? Well, how do you decide what sock to wear?" And I said, "It depends on where I'm going." I have special socks for wherever I'm going. Hey, Don. Christopher. Okay, let me get this into view so you guys will know this is Tech Talk Tuesday number 83. And here are 2 really awesome valves that I've had good time with in my career. These are very, very used. We set records with these, qualified on the pole, got some green hats and some yellow hats running this package right here. And a couple things I'm just going to rattle off the top of my head. This is a 2.75 intake valve. Now, that seems large to about anybody that races anything, but you can see versus this caliper how big this is. And it really is dwarfed, this exhaust valve is dwarfed by this intake valve, but this valve is bigger than a regular small block Chevy 202. This is a 206 exhaust valve. This is what we ran in the Pro Stock bike, okay? Now, when we put 50 runs on these awesome titanium valves, they're hollow. These valves right here, they're gun drilled. Excuse me. Gun drilled this way into the head of the valve, and they leave a certain amount of room in the cross section between where it's drilled to here, and then they would fusion weld this tip. If you can see right here, you can see this line where this has been fusion welded on here. And also another thing that's very interesting about this valve is this head of this valve is fusion welded onto this stem. So this was a multi-part valve back in its day. The head of the valve, the stem of the valve, spun in opposite directions, got really hot. And this is, the weld right here where the stem is welded to the head is stronger than anywhere else on this valve. And then the stem was rifle drilled till it's pretty thin. And then it's CRN chrome plated. This valve has a lot of runs on it at over 10,000 RPM. So you can see it's got a 60-degree valve job. This angle that touches the head is 60 degrees, where most people would run like a 45 or a 50. And I know that's real popular now, is to run steeper angles. And this one is amazing that we were able to increase the cross-sectional area a ton on this valve. If you'll look at this contact angle, this one runs at a 65-degree angle. The head contact angle was 65 degrees, and this angle on this valve is 65 degrees. So that allowed us to have a really large throat for how big the exhaust valve was. And that's 2015, so these valves are 5 or 6 years old now. Technology has changed a ton. This is what we ran back then. It ran good. We ran 670s with the Pro Stock motorcycle back then, several times, 680s all the time. And it's a little bit tougher to go that now. They've got different gasoline, I think, and tracks prep different, and people give you every reason why they're really not going a lot faster. I think 2021 we'll see some pretty big moves in Pro Stock motorcycle, but 2015, 16, 17, 18, 19, if you ran a 675 or a 677 or a 678, you were pretty awesome in any of the last 5 years, and you probably will be again in 2021. But I didn't mess with it since then, so I don't know what they're doing now, but I got a pretty good idea. But I want you to know this valve is very used. But look how good the valve job held up after over 10,000 RPM, 50 runs. And you know, that's not a lot, but that's one reason why these titanium valves live so good in the street now, is because we only turn them 6,000 RPM, which is, you know, this valve can handle a lot. All right, back to the original content was going to be, I use this as an example of why is the intake valve bigger than the exhaust valve. And please remember, this is my standard default. These are my opinions, my ideas, and there's a lot of smart people out there. I even see on my YouTube channel where people that are really smart, that make me look like I'm a fifth grader, that don't always agree with what I'm saying, and I'm so happy with that. I love to hear their opinions. I love to learn, and the more I teach y'all and the more I tell y'all what I think I know, the more I learn. So I am sharing this basic understanding that I have of what's going on here. So when the piston goes down, here's the 5.14 piston that we ran on that same Pro Stock team back then. This piston is over 5 inches in diameter. It's over 5.1 inches. And then when you put this giant 2 3/4 inch valve on it, you can see that this piston is full of valve. And I know I've shown this to you too many times, but I don't have a lot of these left anymore. But you can see that we cheated the exhaust valve over as far as we could to the cylinder wall. Even had to notch the piston into the side here to get a big enough exhaust valve in it. And then the intake valve is left away from the wall a little bit because the flow bench guys say that you need room over here on the bore so that the air that comes in through the intake port can turn that corner and come around, and they want it to have plenty of room to flow all the way around. And then they use velocity probes to vector all the way around and say, you know, they want it to have equal velocity all the way around the valve. And that's just their opinion. That's the way they figure it. But what I always wanted it to do was to put the biggest valve that I could make fit, the biggest valve I could make fit, and fill this thing all the way up. And then I wanted the biggest exhaust valve I could fit. And the reason the intake valve is bigger than the exhaust is because if you make one of these bigger and one of them smaller to make more here, because you got one of them's got to give. They're on 6-degree cant angles, which mean they're going towards each other on overlap. So if these two valves were open a little bit at TDC, they would clank. So that's called clipping clearance. So you gotta take into consideration not to hit the wall over here, not to have clipping clearance here, and for them not to hit the cylinder wall on this side. And I'm gonna show you a side view of this piston so you can see how much of the exhaust we cut away to get the exhaust valve that far over there. Now, if it was left up to me, which it was at the time, but I didn't know as much about it, or didn't think I knew as much about it. I think I know more about it now, but that's my opinion of what I think I know. But I would put a bigger intake valve in it, and I'd put a bigger exhaust valve in it, and I'd move the whole thing over this way so that I could get a bigger valve in there. And the reason I like a bigger valve, even though the flow bench tells us to leave room here so that we can get some more flow around the short turn radius, I like the fact that this 270 degrees of a 360, 270 degrees of this valve would be bigger and you would have more flow, even if it did cut you off a little bit right here. The net gain, I think, would be a bonus. Now, remember, this valve is going in at an angle. So the further it opens, the more towards the center of the bore it goes. And also another thing to consider about how big this valve is right here, y'all. We ran this thing 1.2 inches lift. Not 600 lift, not 700 lift, not 800 lift, not 900 lift, not 1 inch lift, but 1 inch 200 lift. That's a lot of lift for a valve that big. And the spring pressure was so huge that we had to put 400 and something pounds on the seat to control this valve, and over 1,000 pounds installed pressure, not installed, 1,000 pounds open pressure, just so it could follow the camshaft, because we had a 600 lobe with a 2-to-1 rocker ratio. 600 lobe with a 2-to-1 rocker ratio. So when that lobe was lifted to full lift to 600, the rocker ratio would take it 600 and add another double to it, so it would be 1.2. We also ran 1.2 inch lift on the exhaust valve. And what we found was we never got enough exhaust flow. We kept putting bigger pipes on it. We kept putting bigger exhaust manifolds on it, bigger pipes, and trying to get more exhaust out. And we kept adding duration to the exhaust side. We kept putting rocker ratio on the exhaust side, and we kept picking up horsepower by putting more effort into the exhaust side. And going back to the history of why this happened, I wrote down a couple things that I thought was interesting that was run across my flow bench, my dyno, and my shop over the decades. Try and get this where the light isn't. Okay. A Chrysler Hemi back in 1963, intake valve and the exhaust valve. The exhaust valve was 86%. That thing came with a giant 1.94 exhaust valve. The Vance & Hines Pro Stock engine that the majority of the field is using, where I got my finger over the micrometer. Hang on. I hope y'all can hear me. The Vance & Hines 2-valve that they ran last year with a 48 millimeter intake valve and a 40 millimeter exhaust valve the exhaust valve was 83% of the intake. A Chevrolet 302 back in 1967 dominated the Trans Am scene. 4-inch bore, 3-inch stroke, had a 202 intake and a 1/600 exhaust. That was 79% between the intake and exhaust valve. The S&S engine that I'm showing you right here with this 2750 and this 206 is terrible at 75%. And then the new Chevrolets, the LS, I don't know exactly, but I'm going to guess out loud because I'm okay to be wrong, but this is just gets the general idea. I read where they come with 1.58, 1.59, and 1.6 exhaust valves, but they have like a 2.15 intake valve. And I know guys are putting bigger and bigger intake valves in these LSs and leaving the little baby exhaust valve in them that's smaller than the Chevrolet 302 had. These had a 1.600, but these guys are running exhaust valves smaller. And also the relationship between the intake and exhaust is horrible here versus here, and with a Chrysler Hemi here versus here. How could that be possible that it could be 86% from the factory and 73% from the factory? Well, we have learned over years, we've learned over decades, that we only have so much real estate inside the bore. So we have to choose. Are we going to use up as much space as we can to get the air in, and we're going to use whatever's left to get the air out? Air and fuel in, burnt air and fuel out. So this part right here, because we have flow benches, this is my opinion, the guys that work on flow benches work 95% of their time from the experience and the knowledge and the understanding I have talking to people, 95% or 99% of their time working on this side of the head. And they don't work on this side of the head much, but they say, well, this flows 400 and this flows 300, and this flows 500 and this flows 400, and whatever. But this, they flow at 28 inches of depression, which is nowhere near what's really happening when the engine's running. And this one, they flow at 28 inches of depression, which the exhaust valve never sees that. The exhaust valve is under so much pressure that you can get burnt hydrocarbons. You know what? I got to say, did you know that John Force's Nitro Funny Car has a smaller exhaust valve than this? John Force's Nitro car, Tony Schumacher's Top Fuel car, has a smaller intake valve, a smaller exhaust valve than this. I think they have a 2.5 intake, I believe, and I think they have like a 194 or 1900 exhaust valve, and this is a 2060 exhaust valve. So if they could, they would put bigger exhaust valves in it, but they have a little bore on the top fuelers, the Nitro cars. They have like maybe a 4.5 bore, and with a 4.5 bore, I'm talking out of school because I do not know this. These are just opinions. They have a small bore, so they got to put as much in here and as much here as they can fit. But they come in at 55 pounds of boost over here, and they go out at 10,000 horsepower over here. So this is stuffed under pressure, huge. But this over here, the pressure is so high on this side that it bends rocker arms. It folds up push rods because this valve, this little baby exhaust valve, is trying to open up against unbelievable cylinder pressure. And if you put a bigger exhaust valve in, the way I understand it, they're saying if you put a bigger exhaust valve in, it won't even come off the seat because the pressure in the cylinder is so great. So they have to go smaller and smaller with the exhaust valve just so they can get it to open against the unbelievable cylinder pressure inside the cylinder. And I am talking out of school, and after this is finished, I'll go back and look at the comments and try and respond to some. But I want to change over to something that's a little bit more relative of what we're doing, and that is at 28 inches depression going in, we're only going to get on this head and this valve and this piston, we're going to get about 650 or 750 CFM at 1 inch 200 lift into this 5 1/8 bore, 5.140 bore. And then when it explodes and it's time for it to come out, we're going to have 1,000 PSI trying to get past this exhaust valve. So I'm going to set this up right here and draw a picture and show you that this is the port in the head, and this is where the valve sits. Here's this valve. This is on the exhaust side now. And when we change this from a 45 degree angle here to a 60 or 65 degree angle here, we were able to take all this material out and create a giant throat area. And that allowed so much more area for the exhaust to get out that the industry was able to sneak up on this percentage between the intake and exhaust. It's so hard to get air in the engine because we only atmosphere brings the air in the engine, and the cylinder pressure inside and the burnt gases is how you get the air out of the engine. So these are interesting that we were able to go back in time and look at 86% on a new Chrysler Hemi, 83 on the Pro Stock Suzuki, and then of course 79% on a Chevrolet 302, which was revolutionary in its day. I don't know how many, 55 years ago. And then this right here is 60 years, 55 years ago, 50 some odd years ago. And then we're still kind of stuck in that range. But last but not least, I want to tell y'all that the engines that we emulate, the engines that we copy, the old school of 70% of intake and exhaust, flow rates, you need 75% of exhaust flow, of the intake flow on the exhaust. Most of these formulas were developed at 5,000, 6,000 RPM. And when you go back in history and you look at the Hudson Hornet that won the first Daytona race on the beach, or whichever one it was, first 5 years, I think somebody won with a Hudson Hornet. If that engine turned 4,000 RPM back in the day, that's amazing. I mean, they idle at 4,000 now. So it's really hard to use some of these relative old memories and math to create the future. And I think that we should consider that we are stuck at horsepower. Somebody told me, I read it yesterday, somebody said on the internet, my engine program is topped out. His quote was, my engine program is maxed out. That means he has tried everything. That's all he knows. That's all he can find out. He is done. If I was him, I'd do something right in here. And some of it's not going to be easy, but I'm going to say there's some horsepower right over here, because there's a lot of work getting it out of here, and it's a lot of work getting it in there. Of course, we only have atmosphere. What does it come in at? It comes in at barometer. Right now in Florida, testing down there is 2990. That's the amount of, when this piston goes down, 2990 shoves the air in the engine. But it's 800, 1200 PSI trying to get out past this little valve. I ran out of time. Doggone it. Let me flip back over to my John Myers t-shirt and show y'all. Please understand that the controversial nature of some of the things I said today are just my opinion, and don't hate on me about it. I just want to share what I'm thinking with you, and I would love to have a discussion if somebody knows better because of certain things. But that is a broad stroke of what's going on there, because there's a lot going on. I got an M8 head here that we put 4 over intakes and 4 over exhaust. And I know this sounds crazy, but this head right here flows the same on both sides within 10 CFM. And it's going to make a lot of power. When the camshaft is right for this, and the exhaust pipe is right for this, because it's getting air in there, and oh my goodness, it's getting the air out. 4 over, intake and exhaust. I hope I see you again on Tech Talk Tuesday next Tuesday, and I'm back in Tennessee, where Jackie Bryce lives. May God bless y'all. Take care of each other. Drive safe. Be careful. Good night.